One day, a block away from Carl's apartment, I pulled my little blue Toyota out into a small intersection, oblivious of this kid approaching on his motor scooter. The kid dumped his bike and slid to a stop in the vicinity of my front wheels, scraping up his leg. Locals stood and watched. My white cat Martha, along for the ride, sat on my dashboard and watched. I got out and floundered in Japanese with the boy who stood there impassively examining his leg. I called Carl. No answer. I ran to the corner, and there he was, a block away in front of his apartment. He came bouncing up and took control of the situation, using his linguistic and interventionalist skills to persuade a trembling boy with a scraped knee not to call the cops. "They just complicate things, kid," he said. The kid, cowed, agreed. This was excellent given the white kitten sitting on my dashboard, and especially considering that a few days earlier I had plucked a realistic scale model toy AK-47 out of someone's trash pile and thrown it in my rear seat. Why? No one knows. Carl persuaded the kid to let me take him to the hospital, where they bandaged him up and sent him home. The kid was sweet, college senior who looked 16 and said he studied American culture and dug grunge rock. Driving him around, I got the impression his favorite artist was a singer named Neil Bana, but after careful questioning, it turned out to be a Seattle group led by Kurt Cobain. I paid his doctor bill and stuffed another 10,000 yen into his hand. Meanwhile, Windsor was bending his scooter back into shape. After we got back and the kid chugged off into the darkness, I stood in the street with Carl while a Japanese friend of his said I'd get nailed by the courts for avoiding the cops and admitting my guilt by paying him off. But young Yasunori's folks weren't that type. I called to apologize a second time 3 weeks later and wound up with his mother serving me chocolate mousse with whipped cream and coffee, and then little sandwiches and Japanese tea, and then a big pizza with Coke, and then fresh strawberries, and then more coffee. Why? You'd think the kid had knocked me off the bike. Carl never concealed his contempt for the Japanese male and never shrank from confrontation. Sekuhara, or sexual harassment, still occurs on the trains. Perverted chikans, touching women or squatting down to look up dresses. Some keep mirrors on extendable sticks. Once, in front of Carl, a Yakuza type hauled off and kicked a young woman halfway across the train car for no discernible reason. Every Japanese male on the train quickly turned and looked the other way. Carl moved to assist the girl, quietly advising her to see a doctor about the bruise on her leg and suggesting she get off at the next stop as, quote, "You don't want to see what's going to happen next," end quote. Then he was in the offender's face, on the other side of whom appeared a providential Indian gentleman no less enraged. "You're pretty good at kicking girls around," offered Carl. "How'd you like to take on a 50-year-old American?" "I'm the teacher from India," chipped in the chap from the subcontinent. After the young lady exited stage left, they got in some good headshots on the offender. At Ikebukuro, they had him by the legs, trying to drag him from the train, but he hung on to the seat rail, with the doors banging closed on his midsection, and so they relented finally, dropped his shoes on the platform, and walked away as the train pulled out. Rotund, white-bearded, usually broke and disheveled. Windsor got his share of disapproving glances on the trains. Often passengers commented aloud about him, assuming he spoke no Japanese. They were quickly rebuked in their native tongue. Late one night, a young tough was ranting in Japanese that Carl was one of those foreign drug addicts. Carl finally shouted, "Bagaro!" "Asshole!" walked over and sat down next to him. Everyone else moved away. Pulling an envelope out of his pocket, a weary Carl whispered, "Yes, it's true. We foreigners have lots of drugs, and you can have these 2 pills if you promise to take them both right now, in front of me." Now, the idiocy required to ingest unknown medication from a shabby stranger you have been publicly insulting boggles the mind. But the guy downed the pills and disappeared into the night, his body now processing Carl's potent high blood pressure medication, 2 doses of which were quite enough to knock him on his ass, and conceivably worse. Windsor told me the next day he'd remorsefully called a contact at the police station to confide the story and ask if anyone had OD'd in the vicinity of the night before. The cop reportedly said, "No, Carl, but please don't do that anymore." Incident number 76. Carl can't sleep, as usual, so he gets up and goes for a walk. It is 4:30 a.m., and he's making his way down a dark neighborhood street in Narima Ward, headed for the local 7-Eleven. Suddenly, just behind him, the screech of bicycle brakes. Carl turns around to see a large young guy on a bike looking at him. "Urusai!" shouts Carl, meaning, "You are loud and intrusive, shut up." The big guy looks at Carl. "It's not me, it's my bike," he explains. "Bagaero," growls Carl, meaning, "You stupid man." The tall young Japanese is looking at Carl, this shabby Santa with eyes like death. What was the reality there that night? We can at least imagine the kid jamming down the avenue, enjoying the speed and the rarity of an empty Tokyo street, his head down, suddenly looking up to see Carl being forced to slam on his squeaky brakes. Or we could imagine him as a local bully or a member of a gang of bullies happening on an old man late at night and deciding to fuck with him. But these are only speculations, because all he actually said was, "It wasn't me, it was my bike." Carl then points out, laced with all the Japanese expletive at his command, that there wasn't much difference between him and his bike in this situation. For all practical purposes, when you are on your bike, you are your bike. The guy is carefully moving the bike past Carl, still seated, using his long legs to scuffle along. He slows down and stares back with a pained look, or perhaps he wanted to look fierce. This is all fine with Carl, on edge from not enough sleep. "Well, since you had a chance to hit me with your bike, but you didn't, now you have another chance to hit me off your bike. Why don't you try that?" The guy turns away with the same pained look and begins to ride off, but then stops and turns one more time. "Uh-oh," thought Carl, bracing himself. "He's going to come back and fight." The Japanese is looking back at our bristling, natural-born killer Santa, chest poked out like a giant pigeon. He is not ready for this pigeon, for this angry, bearded porcupine. "I told you, it wasn't me. It was the bike." "Come on," smiles Carl, gesturing to his chest with both thumbs, bouncing on his heels, his eyes gleaming. "Come on." You have to feel for the other guy, unable to react or form sentences in his own language. But why hadn't he apologized quickly, as he should to a man many years his senior, who had the right to shout "Urusai" at his clumsy behavior at 4:30 a.m.? Or is he really some sort of bully? We don't know. We can only imagine him riding off, building up speed, streaking around a corner, perhaps pretending that his feet were fists and his pedals were Carl's face. But they weren't. It was his bike.